Let's open up the Black Series Archive 6-inch scale figure of Luke Skywalker in Hoth gear. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. Today I'm continuing with my 2025 goal of opening up all of my Black Series figures. So I reached into my box of archive figures and lucky dip pulled one out at random, and voila, it is Luke Skywalker in his Hoth gear. I've had this one for a while. I really like this outfit that Luke wears in The Empire Strikes Back, so I really want to get this one out of the packaging and get him all posed on display. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll open the figure up. We'll go over all of the details and the accessories, but first let's take a quick look at the packaging. While most of these Star Wars Black Series line of figures are packaged in boxes, for the archive line, Hasbro uses a backing card and bubble design. It is rectangular in shape with a cutout at the top for the hanger and an angular cutout along the left edge, which is mirrored by this cut-off corner on the front clear bubble. We've got the Star Wars, the Black Series logo here on the top right, and for this particular figure, it was part of the 50 Lucasfilm collection, so we have that logo in the top left in a yellow or gold color, which is continuing on. We also have that same gold color used for the character name down this left edge, Luke Skywalker in brackets Hoth. A nice clear large bubble here showing the figure packaged with two accessories, a lightsaber and a blaster pistol. We also have a small angular cardboard insert here showing Luke Skywalker in his outfit from The Empire Strikes Back. Though of course it's interesting to note that the artwork does depict Luke with his Hoth goggles here worn on the top of his cap, while the figure itself do not actually have this accessory. It's kind of interesting to note that comparison there. Now of course we've got a nice gray panel here behind the figure which really helps show off some of the details, and that extends down to the right hand side where we have the archive series logo here as well. Moving on to the back of the carded figure, we have that insert artwork here, nice and large, nice and clear. It looks really great here with the Star Wars, the Black Series logo here, of course, and we also have a blurb for Luke Skywalker. While on patrol, Luke and his Tauntaun are attacked by a vicious wampa. The creature hangs Luke upside down in its cave, but Luke uses the Force to escape. And that is there in a couple of different languages. Now, because this, of course, is part of the 50 Lucasfilm collection, instead of the usual graphic showing the earlier releases of this particular figure, we have a 50 Lucasfilm graphic with that same logo that is on the front and a timeline of Lucasfilm from the creation in 1971 through to 2021, of course, celebrating 50 years with all of the different movies there, which is really quite fun. The rest of the packaging is copyright, barcode, all of that kind of stuff. Now, I think it's a little sad that there isn't a reference to the earlier versions of this figure on the back of the packaging. It has been released a few different times. There are some subtle differences with this particular version, which I think are interesting. So I can't wait to open it up and take a closer look. So now I have Luke Skywalker as well as his accessories out of the packaging finally, so we can take a closer look, and he stands up really well, which I'm always grateful for. He's got nice flat soles to the bottom of his snowshoes there. He stands up really nice, which is fun. There is a lot of details on this figure, just so much sculpting, little paint details, so many little accessory details on this figure. It's so fun. So I don't own the older versions of this figure, but of course I have looked online. He came with a Wampa in one of the releases. Sadly, I don't own a Wampa because I am a little bit newer to Black Series collecting, so I don't have many of those really old black and orange line figures. But something that I thought was interesting was that, of course, the archive line reissues of older figures. This one has the digital printing, which is a nice upgrade, but in this particular release on the archive backing card, it does not have the sort of the blood that is usually applied on the side of Luke's face, because of course this is kind of his post-Wampa attack look. When he's riding his Tauntaun on patrol, he has his Hoth goggles on the top, but once he's attacked by the Wampa, he kind of loses them. So this is kind of his post-Wampa look, because of course if you look up really close, you can see that this figure does have the original faint faint scar lines on the face there, but we don't have the blood to go with it. So it's kind of an interesting choice to still use this particular sculpt where we have these faint lines on the side of the face. If you're looking at it from a distance, you probably won't notice that scarring there, but because this is post-Wampa, of course he would have those wounds on his face because he doesn't have the goggles. Personally, I would have loved it if they'd given us little removable goggles so you could do, you know, either or, because of course the scarring is so subtle. You could probably get away with this being, you know, a before the attack version of Luke. So just having those goggles would be fun, you know, just something to sort of slip around. Some of the other figures from the vintage collection line do this as a little removable piece because the goggles are translucent. You can see through them. So they're generally made as a separate piece out of translucent plastic. So they sit as an accessory. So I think that that was a little bit of a shame that this figure doesn't come with goggles as a separate accessory, but the detail here does look quite nice. So of course we've got a soft goods scarf hanging down to the side from his cap, his hat here, because of course while Luke is normally upright, when he is imprisoned by the Wampa, he's going to be hanging upside down. So of course if this was plastic, it would probably kind of be sticking straight up in the wrong direction. So if you want to sort of put this in display, perhaps you want to attach it to the top surface of your bookshelf somehow, you can hang him upside down. It does a pretty good job. I think you probably need to maybe put like a bit of a rubber band or something around it just to kind of encourage it to sort of fold down this way, so it's going to hang down properly over time. Mine's straight out of the packaging, so it's kind of just sticking straight out there to the side, but I do like that little soft goods touch. So just to give that sort of option there if you want to hang him upside down or perhaps sort of lie him in snow or something like that, you've got the options because it's not a rigid sculpted piece. But we do have some really nice details here on his hat. We've got his little communicator greebly here, which looks like a separate sculpted piece that is attached on there. It looks like it's cast in a metallic silver plastic. It is a little bit rubbery, so it shouldn't snap off if you are putting your figures away or if he unfortunately falls over, but you don't want to bend that because it probably will get quite the curve. Mine is nice and straight out of the box, which is nice, and it's got some nice details. It doesn't look painted, but there is just some nice detail work there. And of course his hat has a lot of details. If I raise that up, you can see we've kind of got a padded section here over his right ear. We've got sort of little buckles and things going on across the back that are all painted over top of the sculpting. We've got the sort of crisscross quilting, of course, sort of all of the Hoth snow gear are sort of quilted and padded for insulation. And of course we've got the top sort of hat section here, which is a cream with sort of that same sort of a brown caramel color and a painting around the detail lines. So overall the hat looks really nice. Of course, because he's wearing a hat, we don't have Luke's hair, so we do have a bit of an exposed neck at the back rather than having any kind of hair sticking out there. It's a little bit awkward, but again, it's probably the same kind of thing as the back of the knees. It's not an area we're really looking at in depth, and it does look pretty nice from the front. I like how it sort of loops under the chin quite nicely. We even have the little sculpting here, a little bit of a clasp, and the paint lines around the face are nice and clean. It doesn't spill over onto the face. I don't like that. I like the face being quite a sharp, tidy edge because of course this is sculpted all as one piece. It looks like the top hat section is actually sculpted on. It's really tight with the face. So I think this is all in one piece, though I would have expected perhaps this top section to be separate, but it's really tight in with the face under here. So it's a little hard to tell, to be honest. It might be a separate piece because of course we've got this join for the fabric to go underneath. It's very tight around the back. Yes, the back seam, that is a separate piece, but it's just really tight in here with the face, so that's kind of fun and interesting there. Now, of course, we've got the digital printing, which I really do like, but there's something interesting about this one that I don't think I really noticed on some of the other more recent figures, in that the printing ink on this has a shine to it. So it kind of has a little bit of a weird gloss effect to his eyes under certain lights, and it kind of makes it a little bit hard to focus on the details, because when you look really close you just end up getting that white shine in the eyes, which kind of gives it kind of like a more slightly sort of out of focus effect, which is a shame because it's digital printing. I want to see the details, but every time I'm trying to look at the eyes close up, they just look a little bit unusual because I'm just getting the white reflected in his eyes there. But other than that, it looks really good. I do like the scarring on the face. It's kind of subtle, but I don't know if I would... I'm kind of torn about whether I would want the sort of the blood paint effect on his face, because I don't have the Wampa, I don't have a Tauntaun. He's going to be standing by himself for a while, so he looks nice and tidy and clean, and certainly if I pose him facing this direction, I'm not going to see it at all. But then again, he's missing his goggles, so it's kind of, I kind of feel like they should have painted the blood there on the face. I think that would have just been a little bit more in terms of being accurate to the costume and the scene. He's not going to have those scars in this outfit without just a little bit of blood to his wounds there. But overall, I do like the digital printing. When you compare them to older figures, it's just absolutely such a great improvement. So I really like the face on this one. So moving on down, so he's got sort of a snowsuit of sorts. We've got this sort of cream colored sleeves here. We've got details here on his right sleeve. It looks like a pocket and a bit of a sort of a compad rank badge type sort of greavely here on his upper shoulder. His left shoulder is bare, but we do have a greavely here on the sort of gauntlet section of his glove here. We've got a raised detail with a yellow paint application there, and on this one we don't have any details on the gauntlet, but we do have red and blue on that little greavely section there. Now of course we do have some grey quilting here on the shoulders, just coming out underneath his sort of caramel brown beige vest here that we see a lot of the rebel soldiers and characters like Princess Leia wearing. So we've got that sort of same crisscross quilting insulating here on the vest. We've got that raised puffy collar like we see Luke on his snow speeder jacket, which is quite fun. We've got a little bit of sort of like a white scarf detail sculpted in there as well. We've got his rank badge. He has 3 blue circles which are raised and painted quite tidily, which is always great to see. That's something I always look for on the Imperial characters, making sure that their rank badges are nice and tidy. He's got a greavely compad rank badge over on this side. A little bit softer detail for this one, but we do have a nice metallic finish there with quite a few different painted buttons. It looks like we've got, I think that one is maybe a white or a cream button, and then we've got red, blue and black, so lots of tiny little details there. And of course we've got a belt. This one is sculpted on. Sometimes the belts on figures are a separate sort of rubbery plastic which is then attached over the figure. This one is sculpted on, so it's not going to move, but we do have lots of details. I'm just going to swivel his arms up out of the way so we can see the belt in clearer detail. Nice silver angular buckle here in the front with little silver studs on either side. We've got sort of a little ring hanging here, but for the sake of the actual toy accessory, we have this hook here and studs to hang the lightsaber hilt off. The hilt does have a ring, so I'll be testing that out shortly, and that is actually quite a nice deep hook. I'm hoping that's going to look kind of cool. Moving on to the back, we've got 2 squarish pouches with a silver dome painted on the sort of top flap as a clasp for each of those, looking quite nice. And then again we've got 2 little pouches here. We've got a long one and a squarish one, again with silver painted sort of dome clasps to it. All of those domes are painted really nicely over that raised sculpting for the dome. That's always important for me to have the paint line matching up. And then we have a holster which is actually attached to this section here. So it's all one piece with this sort of lower section of the vest, and while it looks like it's kind of attached to the strap around the thigh, it's not. Sometimes you have these ones where the holster is kind of like pegged in, which can limit the legs. This one is not, even though it kind of looks like it. It actually sits fairly close to it, so if you're looking like that, it does actually hang there, but of course because it's separate means that it's not going to line up when we start moving the legs, but then it's also also not going to limit the movement of the legs. So it's kind of a mix there. It depends on which kind of camp you fall in, whether you want it kind of accurate or you want it to be able to sort of move freely so that we can move the legs around. Now we've got grey pants with quilting sort of starting at the knees going down. We do have a sculpted strap here for that holster with some silver domes, but unfortunately on this one the brown paint hasn't quite covered the sculpting all the way around. There is a little bit where the base grey plastic is still visible. I wish that that was painted just a little bit further down to completely cover the strap, because it does kind of grab my attention there, and it is just a plain brown strap going all the way around. It's just those silver domes there on the front, no straps on the other leg. Of course, this is an older figure, so we have the 2-point articulation for the knees. I personally, I say this often, it's not my favorite. I find that that separate kneecap section really cuts through a lot of detail. On this particular one, we lose a little bit of the quilting detail here from the costumes because of all of these sort of cross marks are cut through by all of these articulation marks. But then again, having so much sort of busy detail here kind of helps obscure this. And you can kind of tell which parts are plastic grey and which parts are painted grey. So the thighs up here, these are plastic grey. The thighs here, we've obviously got the swivel articulation point so we can turn the thighs side to side, but the texture, there's kind of horizontal lines giving us a little bit of a fabric texture. This top section here doesn't have that same, it's kind of just there, but it's a little bit lighter plastic than here, and also the texture is a little bit more flat. I can see the lines and the texture, and I can feel it with my fingernail here. It's very thinner. It's just sort of flatter, so it kind of gives it a little bit more of a break, which I do like it when this and this are much more continuous. This looks like subtly different plastic batches. It's still the same grey, but somehow this section kind of looks paler than this section here. And I don't think there is a weathering, a sort of a brush over effect to it to account for that colour difference. I think it is just a very subtle different plastic batch. Now down here we've got that plastic used for the thighs and the kneecaps, but the section of leg just above the boots, I believe that's made out of this plastic because this is painted grey. Now the pegs in the back are the same grey plastic as the top, so thankfully we don't have sort of, sometimes the colours really start to mix and match when you get to the articulation in the back there, but because the boots are a little bit lower, that peg doesn't actually cut into the boots, which is nice. Same with the pegs. It really bothers me when we have these really large pegs cutting through important boot detail, but this is still on the pants. But you can just kind of tell the difference between the plastic sections because they have a bit more of a glossy shine to them, and then the painted sections have a much more duller color tone to it. It's a very small section. When looking at the front, you can kind of notice it a little bit more from the sides, particularly when looking at this section and this section, you can really see that shine difference. But from the front, it's not too bad, and certainly from a distance, the legs and pants just all look the same color, which is fine. I'm looking very close up. Moving on to the boots, we've got the sort of beigey cream caramel type color here. It's a little bit lighter than the vest, and we have really sort of yellowy cream color straps here. The plastic for the shoe part of the boots is actually really glossy, which is kind of fun, and it kind of matches up with the boot section here. The painting for the sculpting strap lines is a little bit all over the place. Sometimes it looks tidy, and then we've got sections like here where it's just not really lining up as well. You can see that there is a sculpted line, but the yellow paint kind of almost double over the edge of it there. On this side, we can see the sculpted line for the strap there, and the yellow hasn't gone all the way to the edge. So it generally, it looks okay. And then when you start looking at it a little bit close up, it starts to get all over this section here. The yellow has gone below the sculpting line, so that yellow is now on the boot part of it. Now, I'm not looking too closely, it looks fine, but of course I'm trying to see just how well this figure is made, so it's a little bit hit and miss. Of course, painting little measurements of error are going to vary from figure to figure. Other figures are not going to have this exact sort of painting error here. overall, something about the sculpting on this boot just looks a little bit more detailed. We've got sort of bunching and stuff like that. On this one, it's just smooth, which I think is interesting. It just kind of looks very smooth. And then on this side, we've got all of these sort of gathers where the wider boot is pulled in by those straps. I think I like this side better just because that looks just a little bit more realistic, a little bit more detail. This side kind of looks like a simpler sculpting style. I know that they're probably trying to reference the original costume, and I haven't really studied to see if Luke's boots are a little bit more gathered on his left boot than his right, but just seeing the two of them side by side in a sculpted toy, that is just a little bit of a difference there. And of course on the underside we have 2 peg holes, because I am assuming, because I don't own the original set, this is probably to allow us to suspend Luke. So he's got 2 extra peg holes because one might not be enough to fully suspend him. We've got 2 to really sort of hold him in place there, but I don't have anything to attach him to. I guess you could attach him to some third-party stands and then glue them to the top surface of your display shelf. But yes, for mine, he's going to be standing still. So I like the details on him. I think, thinking about it, I think I would prefer just a little bit of blood. I know that sounds a little bit gruesome, but a little bit of blood on his face just to kind of accent the sculpted scar lines there, his wound lines, because he doesn't have the goggles. And I do like figures to sort of match up to the scenes specifically as they are on screen. A few sort of paint inconsistencies in terms of that strap and a few patches on the boots, but thankfully not too much around the face. That really bothers me. Of course, a lot of characters, we're going to focus on the upper body towards the bottom. I mean, you can weather this one up and put sort of fake snow, sort of white washes around the boots, and that's going to completely cover that up if it really bothers you. Something interesting, this holster is one of those ones that actually has a strap that pegs in. It's a little bit hard to show, but there is a peg going through and clasping that little strap in place. There is a sculpted little clasp on the strap there, but it doesn't have any paint applied to it. So I'm hoping that the accessories are going to work really well on his belt. Interesting that it's a sculpted belt. And I have to say, there is a pretty good line here for the torso. Sometimes it really cuts through, but having it in this position, it just kind of, it just works. It's not really sort of harsh in the way that it cuts across there. This figure has an interesting sort of gloss to it. It kind of almost looks like he's sort of wet, like he's been in the snow, because of course the Hoth outfits are kind of trying to be, you know, a bit more moisture resistant, insulating and stuff like that. It's just interesting to see the gloss of it. Looking at the back of the figure, I like the draping of the fabric of the vest, those quilting lines, the way that it kind of bunches, because we're dealing with lots of layers of fabric and stuff like that. So I really like it. And I like the way the sleeves drape down towards the back. It always hides the back of the elbows quite nicely. You can see the padding there of the sort of the sleeves there being tucked into the gauntlets there. Overall, looks really nice. I like seeing the details of the back. You know, that's one of the things you miss if you are a mint on card or mint in box collector. You don't really get to appreciate the details on the back. And sometimes, you know, the figures are pretty plain down the back, but I think this one looks pretty cool, really, actually. To me, the main detail on the back that I don't like is just these large pegs for that older articulation style. It just sort of cuts in there. I think if we had the newer articulation style, he'd look pretty cool. You could even sort of pose him facing off with sort of a wampa or something like that over here, and it wouldn't even look that odd. Some figures look bad from the back, but he actually looks pretty good. That's really nice. Cool. Okay, so let's test out his articulation and then let's get him kitted all up with his accessories. So testing out his head. If I tip his neck back, you can see that articulation style there. It's not a ball style. It's a little bit older, which of course you can still see when you tip his head to the side. If you tip his neck down a little bit, it completely hides it, which is good, because there is just the tiniest little, it's not like a paint flaw, but there's just the white sort of cream color of his scarf is just, there's like a tiny, tiny gray line at the top of that. It's not really a paint paint floor, it just sort of feels like there's a tiny little remnant of some base color or something like that that's not completely covered. It's kind of like a shadow, as it were. So I kind of like having his neck tilted down, so it kind of creates just a little bit more shadow to hide that. But yes, I can turn him all the way to the side. He even skirts over that big puffy collar there on his vest, which is good. Now we do have a little bit of kind of a gap around here, but it's not enough to sort of see through, which I like. Because some figures, when you raise their arms up, you can kind of see through, but because this vest is part of the body, it's solid, we're not going to kind of get any of those things in the, sort of seeing through there. And because it is a vest worn over the sleeves, it makes sense that there is a little bit of sort of a gap around this, but his arms come all the way up, which is nice on both sides. Very good. I was a little bit worried that the sculpting or the quilting here on the shoulders was going to provide a little bit of resistance, but that's quite nice. And let's swing them all the way up. We can get quite tight in the upward direction because, of course, we might be hanging him upside down, so we want his arms to kind of hang like they would. Sometimes if they're hanging out too wide, it doesn't look like they're actually hanging. So, of course, that is an important feature for this particular character. Not every Star Wars character is going to be hanging upside down. Let's test out the elbows. Oh, he's a little bit stiff, but there we go. So of course Luke has a lightsaber, so he's one of those characters that we are going to try and get the hands together to hold a lightsaber. Of course you do need the elbows to come in quite tight to the body. That's lining up not too bad. I'm hoping that's not going to be too much of a wriggle, because of course if the hands don't line up, you run the risk of kind of stretching the lightsaber a little bit, or sort of bending it, trying to get it to go through both hands. If they don't line up, you run the risk of sort of bending it in the middle. And I'm hoping it's a little bit tight, but I'm hoping that he'll be able to hold that position without me sort of having to force his elbows in tighter. I do really want him to hold his lightsaber. He does have his blaster in this, but of course with his fight against the Wampa, I just think he's going to look more sort of iconically Luke versus Wampa with a lightsaber in his hand, so I really want that to work. So it looks like, yes, his wrists are not articulated at the sort of the base of the hand like most Black Series figures nowadays. It's actually articulated at the base of the glove gauntlet section, so we can swivel it round. But of course with this attachment point, we don't have any of the rocker or side to side attachment points that we have when it is at the base of the hand at the wrist, and the same on this side. So those hands are going to be fixed. We can't adjust them in that one, but we can get the rotation there. So he has got a extended trigger finger that's separate, but it is quite hooked on this hand. It's not fully sort of extended, it's quite close, so I'm hoping that's not going to be too hard to get his blaster pistol in there. There's almost no gap between that finger and his thumb. At least there is a bit of flex. Some hands are made out of quite rigid plastic, so you do really have to fight with them, but I can bend that finger out, so I'm hoping that that will go in there nicely. The rest of his fingers are curled, and we have the same on the left hand. We don't have an extended trigger finger, we just have them in that tight curl, which will be good for doing sort of the two-handed lightsaber grip. Okay, so we saw that articulation at the midline sort of torso. Some are a little bit higher up. This one's almost waist. It's not quite right at the belt, just above it. He can turn side to side, but it's kind of stiff, a little bit rocking front and back. We do start to expose that smooth kind of inner sculpting here a little bit. When I bent him back, not my favorite look, because it kind of feels like this one is more like two stacked pieces. Sometimes the articulation is kind of the torso over, sort of like the lower section kind of pegs in up inside the torso section that kind of connects on the top. This one kind of feels like just two stacked pieces, so that when I move them around, you start to kind of see the join almost, like they sort of just sitting on top of each other. But it doesn't actually look bad from the front. Just when I lean him all the way back, you start to really get that gap, which is not my favorite. And also when I turn him to the side, we really start to get a gap there, which is not my favorite. I tend not to sort of do a lot of side-to-side twisting with my characters. To be honest, I almost never utilize this particular articulation point. They could pretty much be a solid torso for me. But he can turn around and he doesn't snap back to center. It's not too rough, but you can see we do start getting quite a wide gap when I move him side to side. So I think he looks better straighter on. And I also don't like breaking up the costume detail. Of course, we can see that there is a fixture. I guess it's a hidden zipper running down the front of that vest, and that line gets quite distorted and broken when we twist him to the side, which wouldn't happen in reality. Okay, let's move on to the legs. So I'm hoping, based on the articulation that I can see, he can open his legs quite wide. Sadly, I don't have a Tauntaun to see if this particular figure would mount on a Tauntaun saddle, but we can see that he does open his legs fairly wide. This is starting to present a little bit of resistance here on that right leg because it's quite solid and permanently attached because it's part of this plastic here. This lower section, it is actually a really good match, I have to say, in terms of both the color and the shine. This is the hard plastic used for most body sections, whereas this lower section here is made from that more flexible rubbery fabric, but you almost can't tell because of just the sheer amount of detail here. So of course this one is rubbery, but it is still quite blocky, so it is restricting. I get to about there and I'm really not going to get much further than that. Moving out to the front, this section flexes a little bit, but that's about as high as that right leg is going to go. We can see how that holster does actually still kind of line up with the strap, even though that's not attached, it's still kind of touching it, so it looks okay. It just tends to stick a little bit out from the side. If we're looking at it from the front, we can see that it's not fully lined up with the leg, but that's still cool. Other leg, again, we're limited by this low section here of his vest. It's got a little bit flex, but it's just, we're not getting all the way up. And to the back, not too bad. Again, a little bit of flex, but it is providing a bit of resistance there. Now let's test out that rotation. Oh, quite smooth. Some of these older figures can be quite tight, but there are some seam lines in terms of the pants and where they would be sewn. Again, when I twist it, it starts to cut through that sculpting, which is not my favorite approach. I generally try and line up all my details, but you can do it here because that top line is hidden by the holster, so it doesn't feel like I am sort of breaking that sculpting up because it's completely hidden. So once you start turning it around, you can start to see where everything starts becoming quite misaligned because of the sculpting of the sort of folds of the pants. It does look just a little bit cleaner when it's straight, but the articulation is there for posing, of course. Testing out the knees, we've got that older two-peg style. We can get his knees quite, very tight all the way up so that he can kick all the way up to his belt. That's quite high. Not my favorite style, but it is useful if you love doing those exaggerated action poses and doing some sort of deep knee positions. Very high kicks there. Okay, very easy to pose his legs. Just a good amount of grip. They're not really hard. I'm not fighting them, but they're not flimsy and sort of swinging around, which is nice. Okay, ankle posing. There we go. Quite pointed. Oh, and we even get a reasonable kind of upward point as well. We don't usually get quite that much. And let's see. Little bit of a side-to-side rock. That is actually quite tight. It's holding position nicely, but I can rock his ankles around. So yes, now that I've played around with his articulation, let's see how well I can actually get him to stand back up. That's pretty good. Okay, so that was the Luke Skywalker figure. Let's take a look at his accessories. So of course I'm going to start off with his lightsaber. Now you can see that this is in two parts. That is how it came in the box. It's not broken. They do make it out of two different pieces of plastic. The blade is translucent blue, and then we have the lightsaber hilt made out of a gray plastic. The hilt attaches with a smaller section of peg, but this is one of my least favorite ways of doing the lightsabers for the Black Series, because there is actually a little ridge on this peg, which does hold the lightsaber in place once you click it into place, but it can be kind of nerve-wracking trying to remove it because that ridge really holds in place. Some of my figures, once I've inserted it there, I don't feel safe removing it because I really don't want to snap or put any tension on that peg, because once you've done that, you no longer have a lit lightsaber for your Force wielder character, which is to me quite important. I don't want to risk damaging that, so I'm going to hold that off, not putting that on just for now, because I want to take a closer look at the hilt and hang it on his belt, because of course if you want to put it on his belt, you can't have the blade in it because it looks a little bit odd. The lightsaber is made out of a grey plastic. It's trying to be metallic, but to be honest, I do prefer it when Hasbro paints the lightsaber hilts a metallic silver. If I just quickly grab his blaster pistol, the emitter on his blaster pistol has that gorgeous shiny metallic silver, and when you put them side by side, they just look so different. I love the shine that you get from the metallic paint. It's just not there with the plastic. You just never get a true metallic finish with the plastic. I know it's probably, you know, just quicker and cheaper to do it that way, but I would prefer them to paint them with that metallic silver. So we've got a little bit of black here at the emitter. We've got red there. We've got a tiny little silver switch here. We've got the black grips, of course. The sculpting is quite nice. It looks, you know, not too chunky, but we do have this large ring at the end, which if you are a particular sort of fan of things being highly accurate, he does have a ring at the end of his lightsaber, but this is kind of a bit thicker. It needs to hold on to the figures, so I guess if it really bothers you, you could sort of cut this off. What I really wish Hasbro would do for the Black Series is give us one unlit hilt for like holding or hanging off a belt, and then one with the blade permanently attached, like they often do for the Vintage Collection 3.75 inch line, because those lightsabers are just too small to do as pegs, so you get both options for most figures that come with lightsabers. Not all of them do. For the Black Series, we get the removable blades, and honestly, if they just gave us this twice, I don't think that would be too much extra cost for them. They've already got the molds for it. I just wish that we had those two as different options there, because of course I don't like removing the blades, especially with that peg style. I don't want to risk breaking them because it's really hard to replace. So I'm going to go ahead and test this one hanging on his belt, just to see how it kind of looks. That's not too bad. It's kind of hanging out a little bit away from the body, but that is to be expected. The hook would have to be a little bit more sort of further away from the body and look really obvious. I think that that's a pretty good sort of middle ground between sort of having the hook be functional and not too large and cumbersome that it looks odd if he's holding his lightsaber instead. So of course let's test it out. See, it's not going to be on his belt if he's upside down, but that actually holds it pretty well. If I'm going to shake that around, it'll probably come out, but I don't feel too worried about that just randomly falling off, because it kind of almost clicks on. It's got a good grip to it, because I know sometimes with these lightsabers, they feel like they're just there with just absolutely hanging on for dear life, and just a bit of a breeze is going to knock it straight off, but that as it actually clicks on, which is nice. I'm not worried about that getting lost, of course. I do want to test it out in his hand, so I'm just going to try pushing it through, because his hand looks quite tight, I gotta be honest. I'm going to have to pull his fingers out to get this through, because we've got those larger kind of grips on this saber. Yeah, I did have to push his hand kind of open a little bit to get that to go in, but of course that means he's got a pretty strong grip. That's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. He's not going to drop that at all. So very nice. So of course the big question is, can I do a two-handed pose? Now this is going to be tricky because you can kind of see the angle that it wants to sit in his hands. It's kind of pointing this way, which, because I can't rock his hand around, when I sort of position his hand like here, I'm not entirely sure how well this is going to work in a two-handed pose, to be honest, because I can't rock his hands around very well. I'm going to try. I might be able to do that if I pull open his fingers. They're very tight, I have to say, on this figure. So see if I can push that in, because I really want Luke to hold his saber in 2 hands. Now this is why I'm doing this without the blade in place. Okay, I'm just going to take a moment because I really want to get this posed. I want to see if this can actually do it, or if it's going to put too much tension on this hilt. So it took a moment of sort of pulling out his fingers and quickly trying to get them to clasp around the lightsaber, but the lightsaber is actually straight. I'm actually a bit surprised. I thought, based on the way that I could get his hands together, I thought I might be bending the lightsaber, because it does have a little bit of flex, but of course that's not going to look right on the shelf, and he doesn't actually look too awkward. Sometimes when you get figures to hold a lightsaber in 2 hands, it looks sort of too far away from the body or slightly awkward in a pose, but if you just want to put Luke on display in a classic lightsaber pose, I don't think that looks too bad. It looks kind of cool. Okay, so now let's go ahead and click this into place. This is always the kind of the nervous part, and it's probably going to fly out of his hands as I'm trying to do this, because this lightsaber is kind of a little bit flexible. I'm hoping it's not really giving me a click, but I did get that in there. So of course his hand is let go now, but yes. So there we go. Of course I'm going to have to readjust him a little bit, but he does look good holding onto the lightsaber. Luke just looks right holding a lightsaber, I gotta say. So here he is with one hand on the lightsaber with the full blade. I think it's a really nice blue too. There's obviously a lot of discussion about the colors of the blue lightsabers. In A New Hope, it's quite pale. In the prequels, it's a darker, deeper blue. I think this is a pretty good blue for this version of Luke. Looks pretty nice. That ring is a little bit noticeable there at the bottom of the hilt when he is just holding it just by itself there, without the other hand kind of holding onto the bottom and disguising it a little bit, but it looks pretty cool. Luke just looks really cool with his lightsaber. Okay, so I'm going to take that out of his hands. That does feel like that's a pretty good grip. Sometimes those little notches kind of make a bit of a click or a pop when you get them into place. And the blade does actually look to be fairly straight. Sometimes you can sort of spin them around and find kind of a little bit of a point where they look a little bit straighter for the hilt. But that's pretty nice. That feels like that's in there pretty securely. Let's have a look at the blaster pistol. So I like this one. We've got some paint details. The brown on the grip has come up just a little bit high, in my opinion. It's just a little bit spilled onto the black on that side, a little bit tidier on this side. We've got that lovely silver metallic paint on the emitter. This one is a little bit bendy. You can see it's not a rigid plastic, so I'm hoping that it will go into his hands. Not too difficult. Sometimes when these bendy ones, they just fight when you try and put them into their hands. It does have quite a thick trigger guard that's not thin, and it's enclosed, so I'm hoping that I can get his finger just through there. I'm not actually sure if the finger is actually going to go all the way through. That's quite a tight hole. Might be one of those ones where it's just kind of resting on that gap rather than actually going all the way through, but it looks pretty good in terms of the detail. Just wish it was a little bit more of a sturdier plastic. So pushing the grip through his hands do open up to, oh yes, his finger fits. I was really worried about that. That looked like a really tight little hole, but his finger does go through. It's nice when a character is wearing lighter gloves. It's easier to show the contrast. When they're wearing black gloves, it's really hard to show. But here we go in his pale colored gloves with his finger hooking through the trigger guard. So personally, I like the look of Luke with a lightsaber for this Hoth outfit, but he looks pretty cool with the blaster pistol as well. And I'm really happy that he can hold it quite nicely there. Of course, we don't have the rockers in the wrist to really sort of adjust the position. All we can sort of do is rotate there at this point and at the elbows. So it's going to look, you know, a little bit more rigid than the other modern figures, where we can sort of just create a little bit more flexibility there. Let's test this out in the holster. So it's got one of those straps down there with a peg, which was attached in the bubble. So I'm just going to try and pull this out. Okay, there. I'm always worried about accidentally ripping one of these straps if those pegs are in there too tight. So you can see the peg does actually have a ridge at the bottom to kind of really snap it. Sometimes when they're just a solid column, they just kind of hold in place. This one's actually got that sort of end where it goes a little bit wider at the end to really hold into position. So, ooh, that is tricky. You can see the hole there that it's supposed to peg into. Now, the bottom of the holster is, we have that gap there that you can see all the way through. So I'm hoping this is going to fit in nicely. It is rubbery, so it's kind of fighting me a little bit as I'm trying to push that down. And I don't really want to ruin the metallic paint. You can see it is extending beyond the bottom there. And now let's see if I can push that peg back in. It's very tight. I can get it, I think that's pretty much clasped in there. That's a really snug holster, but it looks really good. Long ago, we used to have those really almost just big, chunky rectangle holsters that were just, they looked comical. They looked far too oversized to fit. It's a tight fit to get in there, but it looks appropriately scaled. It does tend to press the holster away from the body a little bit further now that I have the blaster in there, but I think that looks pretty cool. So there we go. That is the Hoth Luke figure from the archive card. I gotta say the hilt on this one is a little bit bendy. When I'm pushing it through his hands, the hilt does want to bend because it's plastic. I guess that is good that we don't have the metallic paint on a bendy hilt, because I feel like that would potentially crack. The metallic paints tend to be a little bit thicker than regular paint, but he looks really cool. Now I just really wish that I had a Wampa for him to be up against there. I might have to track one down on the secondary market, or maybe fingers crossed they'll reissue one. I'm loving the archive line for giving us the classic iconic figures from the older Black Series lines that we might have missed from those older waves, but with some additional sort of improvements like that digital painting there on the face. I think this is a really cool figure. Of course, Hoth has just so many incredible moments and scenes, and of course so many fans love building out the Empire Strikes Back with collectibles, so this was a must-have. Really happy to finally have him out of his packaging, and so I can add him to my Black Series display. He looks really cool. Just that I think it's mainly just that little strap being mispainted that's my major little critique of this particular figure. He was popular. I did not see many of him on the shelf at the time when I was able to purchase him, but yeah, he looks pretty cool. Just gonna have to work on some poses so that he can be fighting an imaginary Wampa for now, and yeah, he's really cool. Very happy with this one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars collectible and had a lot of fun checking out the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Black Series fan, I recently opened up the Luke Skywalker Yavin Ceremony figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Black Series unboxing playlist. This is the way.